I wanted to work on the ways in which Caravaggio created new types of pictorial narratives. At a certain point, I was interested in the ways in which Caravaggio represented himself in these pictorial narratives and disguising himself as a figure acting in the plot represented. And I could remember that when I was very, very young and I had started studying art history and so on, I had read an essay by Roberto Longhi, a very important art historian in Italy, who rediscovered the Genoa Ecce Homo in 1953-54, and I remembered that he sustained that the pilot represented was Caravaggio. I started considering the possibility whether he was right, just through comparison and of other likenesses of Caravaggio and so on. And as I explained in my monograph, I do believe that he is right, and this is a sort of parody of self-representation that Caravaggio came up with in this very, very compelling painting. And as far as I know, and I think that I can affirm this with conviction, Caravaggio is the only painter at the time that has this vocation, this knack for ridiculing or parodying himself in his paintings. What is very, very important is that the painting is special also not only because I believe it contains a self-portrait by Caravaggio disguised as a pilot, but also because its authorship has been discussed and put into question recently or fairly recently. In many, many cases, the attribution, or in some cases, the attribution of the painting has been rejected, and sometimes it's just on the basis of a visceral reaction to the painting itself. You will not find a real argumentation why the painting is not considered original. People who reject, or scholars who reject the originality of the painting, they rarely explain why they believe it's not by Caravaggio. This vagueness, in my opinion, is attests to the provocation that this sort of shock impact that the painting determines on the viewer. Pentimenti is a technical term and is used consistently in art history. Pentimenti is when you change your mind. So let's say that pentimenti implies modifications. In the case of Caravaggio, it's very, very important that since he worked directly on the canvas, he didn't have a preliminary drawing on which he could rely. And of course, the execution of a painting could take, some time, especially the execution of the representation of a model on the painting. He could change his mind in the course of the execution. In this case, you can see the traces of these modifications. And the most important one is the emplacement of the figure of Christ in the painting. Here you can see a part of the original loincloth here. You can see that it went up and it touched partly of the forearm. You can see here the trace of the original shoulder. And here you can see the traces of the original head that was slightly to the right and slightly further up. You can see here the trace of the tip of the finger here as it was originally. And here you can see, that some traces of pentimenti in the other hand. I think that the amount of pentimenti implies that this is an original composition. There is no doubt about that. If a copyist is about to execute a copy of a painting, he has a composition, the definitive composition in front of him, which means that he has to transfer that composition onto the canvas, for instance. And so the possibility of changing his mind are not there. He can probably make mistakes and so he can change something. But the conception of the painting is pretty clear from the beginning because he's just reproducing another painting. When you are creating directly, in front of the canvas, this is completely different because you can change your mind over time. And actually the painting itself becomes a sort of palimpsest, a sort of text that has been, whose reductions can be, are still discernible in depth, in a certain sense.